I will begin by modeling an experiential lesson. So basically how I teach a lesson on commands following the experiential cycle. So we will be going through the 4 steps of the cycle. But I mean, I'm not gonna like talk about the cycle yet. I want you to like experience one of those classes, and then you will reflect a little bit about how the experience went. I think that's also gonna help you like empathize with your students a little bit when if you decide to follow the experiential cycle. Having already experienced that from the point of view of the students, hopefully that will be helpful. So you will reflect on the lesson after we are done with it. Then Professor Johnson will tell us about the theory behind the experiential cycle in the class. And then finally, you're gonna have like some time to plan your own experiential lesson. Right? So like I said, I will begin with a class on the imperative. So I will be modeling a class on the imperative following the experiential cycle. And I'm going to tell you, before we begin with the class, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some information about the class in which I teach this lesson. So usually I do this lesson for my Spanish 1103 class, which is an intermediate, an intensive elementary Spanish class. My students are usually high beginners, and they have had 2 or 3 years of like previous experience with the language. So they know things like verbs such as like open, close, fold. So they're usually, and some of them are also like lower intermediate. So the thing is that, this is usually the context. So for the first part of the lesson, maybe I'm gonna ask you can you reconstruct this boat? So I want you to work in pairs, and something that is very important is that I want you to talk. I want you to think out loud. So the thing is that I want you to react verbally to what your partner says. And just you can unfold it, you can touch it, you can do anything you want to do with it. Just like 2 or 3 minutes to see if you can reconstruct the boat. But it's very important that you speak. Alright? Okay.
Are you going to unfold it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I'm scared that we won't be able to.
And then open the bottom. It should look like a triangular hat.
It does, yeah.
And then flatten it into the shape of a square after you open up the bottom. And
like that.
Like that. Like that. And while you're doing that, at the same time, pull apart the left and right flaps. What's in the square?
No, but you need to keep the square shape.
Yeah, you have to keep. Okay.
You need to keep the square shape. Yeah.
It looks like.
No, wait.
You won't?
No?
Wait. So this is the square shape,
Yeah.
and then just like this.
Yeah, looks like that's it.
Yeah, I was not gonna figure that out.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's good.
Perfect. So the
Okay.
idea is that they
Perfect.
start. Perfect. So the idea is they start like using commands. So at
Okay.
first, just like talking to each other, and obviously they're not gonna use like the commands like correctly. But the idea is that they the idea is that they get used to the meaning and the ways in which we use commands. So at the first part is just like an oral exercise, and then with the instructions, they are using the commands correctly because they are just reading the instructions, and everybody gets to like follow them. So when they have like experienced something authentic, we're going to like reflect a little bit on what we have done, right? So if you have your piece of paper, we're gonna practice with the verbs that we have been just like saying. You can unfold it if you want. So first, for the first part, I'm gonna say the imperative, and I want you to like to mind the action, right? Okay, so if I say you have like a piece of paper, I have like some more.
Yeah, they're hard to undo.
I know. That's what I'm like. It's
That's
almost
good
as
though.
hard to undo as it is to put
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
together.
No, okay. So if I say fold, what would you do? Excellent. If I say do not open, very good. Open the excellent. Flip it. All right. Crease it. Sorry, I shouldn't do anything. Crease it down the center vertically. Excellent. And then like fold it in half. Right. So we're practicing like the meaning of the verbs that we have just seen in case some people like didn't get it. And now we're going to do it the other way around. I'm gonna mind an action and I want you to say the imperative, right? So if I do this,
Flip the paper over.
flip the paper over, right?
Yeah.
If I do this,
Fold.
fold. If I do this,
Unfold it.
unfold, right? So that's how we're practicing the meaning. We're focusing on like meaning and the uses of those verbs. Then I will talk a little bit. So in my previous slide, I was focusing on meaning. Now I'm gonna focus a little bit on form with this questionnaire. So this is a 1 minute paper on the formal use of commands. Okay, so now like through the questionnaire we can reflect a little bit more on the grammatical aspect of the commands. So are the verbs in the sentences preceded by subject or subject pronouns?
No.
No. So the things that they usually I give them like the instructions that they can reflect on them. The imperative verbs resemble the simple present or the past simple. The simple present.
Yeah.
Do any of the verbs take an S ending?
No.
No. So you see, so the thing is that the idea is that now they get to reflect a little bit more on what they have seen. And now after they have reflected on meaning and form, is when I jump in and I provide like some instruction. So now in this like third part is when I start talking, I lecture a little bit. And I usually will tell them like the rules that commands usually follow, like the imperative verbs are placed at the beginning of the sentence and do not have a subject. Imperative verbs are stated in the simple present. So before I explicitly tell them the rules, I give them a chance to infer the rule through this questionnaire, also based on the examples that they work on. But if they didn't get it, they always have my explanation. More rules, the negative forms also resemble the present simple, preceded by do not, with examples, and also usually like at this in this part they also get to like practice with some like exercises, grammatical exercises maybe from the book. And then finally, once we have finished this part, they get to do something that resembles the original exercise. So the thing is that what I usually ask them is like following the paperboard example, think of something you know how to do and explain it to your partner. For example, how to cook your favorite dish, how to get an A in chemistry, how to learn a foreign language, how to get to your favorite restaurant from campus. So they get to like do something similar to something that resembles the exercise that we started like the class with. So usually I ask them to like make a list for like 4 or 5 items, and then they get to share. They get to like explain their partners how to do something that they know how to do. So basically, I have just like modeled the class. And now that you have experienced it a little bit, why don't you take some time to like reflect on what did you learn, how did you learn it, what aspect of the lesson do you think were more effective, how did you feel during the learning process?
Hi guys.
Hi.
Summer
Hi.
20. Coming with my class.
Hello.
So, since you experienced this as a student, why don't you reflect? Take a minute to like reflect on some of the things that you have seen, especially like on the things that you didn't focus on the third and fourth part, because I mean you know English and I want you to have time to like design your own lesson. But just like especially think about like the beginning of the lesson. How would you have felt if you have been experiencing that as a student?
I mean, I would have been a little confused at first, maybe, but then eventually get into, I'd start to understand the meaning of the imperatives and,
That-
and especially with you up there miming the actions as well, that helps.
Yeah, that's the idea. The idea is that at first, I mean, the thing is that maybe like the first time you do this in your class, you're gonna be like a little bit confused.
Yeah.
But then if you like continue like using this model, eventually they know that you are gonna like help them.
Mm-hmm.
So even if at first they feel a little bit like insecure, they know that when step 2 and step 3 come, you're gonna provide them with something more specific.
Yeah.
Any other comments that you would like to share about like the activity, like some how did you feel, or like some aspects of the lesson that you like, or
I really liked the second part, the concrete experience 2,
yeah,
where Ryan read the instructions to the rest of the class.
yeah,
Yeah, that made me feel good because the first part, I enjoyed it and it was fun.
Yeah.
But it also made me wonder if I was a bit stupid. I can't figure out how to rebuild this boat. Like, it seems like a simple task. But then I was comforted by the instructions that were
yeah.
up.
And no, I mean the thing is that also I think sometimes I just like remind my students that I mean honestly I know how to build a paper boat because I had read the instructions first. I mean there is no way that I could have like build a boat without like the instructions. So it is just like the idea is just to like provide them with something. As Professor Johnson will tell us in her section, is just the idea is to like provide them with something like that is authentic. But it's good to like reassure them that they don't have to be there. Okay, so now I'm gonna leave you with her and
Now you could give your feedback.
and the theory behind what we have done.
Thanks.
About my class.
Okay. So today's workshop and the experience that you just had are both modeled off the experiential learning cycle. This is a model of learning that was first developed in 1984 by a researcher named Kolb. And I like to tell people in workshops it's been widely misapplied and misused ever since. So you might hear some negative things about Kolb's learning cycle. That's fine, that's normal, that's true. However, there's some really excellent ways to use it as well. Have you guys heard the Einstein quote, "You should only make things as simple as possible and no simpler"?
No.
No.
It's a good quote. So one of the problems that I have with the term flipped learning is it makes it seem like students are only doing two things in the classroom. They're reading and learning sort of abstract concepts and they're applying them. Those are the two activities, and we can flip them. I would say that that is an oversimplification, and that really there's more things, maybe even 4 steps, according to Kolb. And this might be a little bit more reflective. As you can see, this is a learning cycle, and it always starts with concrete experience. As in, you have to do something real. It can't be like artificial textbook language that's just there to help you fill out an exercise. The first step in the experiential learning cycle is something real has to happen to you where your brain is momentarily not thinking about the language, but thinking about what you're trying to do through the language, where language becomes a tool, not the end game. That's concrete experience. We'll talk a bit more about each of these, actually, instead of doing a big overview. So when I say authentic language experience, you might also hear me say things like meaningful input. Students have to receive whole language. It could be watching a video. It could be listening to audio. It could be looking at a photo that's an authentic representation of the target culture. It could be examining an artifact in class. Today, I'm actually doing an activity in my class as part of the experiential learning cycle where I have a bag and it has a hairbrush in it. Don't tell my students because they're going to have to guess what's in the bag. The bag has a hairbrush in it, and I say, hey guys, guess what's in this bag? And our authentic experience is they momentarily forget we're trying to learn a language, and instead they're really trying to guess what's in this bag. It's really fun. It only takes a few minutes, but it gives us an authentic source of input. Readings, hands-on activities like the one you just did with the paper boats. It could be something like a community engagement activity or going to an art gallery. It could really be any single thing that we ask students to do in the target language where the point of the activity is learning something through the language and not just learning about the language, right? Okay, so that's a concrete experience. After they've had their concrete experience, they have to reflect on it. We have to take time to carefully observe, record, and reflect on the experience from step one. We have to notice and process meaningful features of the experience. So I'm going to back up again to what Jose just did. First, we had this experience, and we weren't sure which parts of the experience were going to be salient, were going to be meaningful. So the second thing he did, excuse me, I've had a cough for a long time now. The second thing Jose did is walk you through some decontextualized pieces of the experience and say, fold, unfold, don't fold, crease, right? So that your brain would start to notice and process which parts of that experience were important. This is also a time when we can ask students to connect previous experiences, their own ideas, and their own internal resources to what's happening in the classroom. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. Literally any language processing activity. Just asking students questions about what they just read. Comprehension questions, keyword IDs, asking them to do some sort of TPR to refocus on meaningful language, IDing the author perspective, IDing the type of text, so many things. It can also be something like a questionnaire, which you also did to help you focus on the grammatical features, right? It could also be a minute paper or a small group discussion. There's really unlimited possibilities as long as you're really helping students to focus. The reason why reflective observation is so important is because human beings constantly have experiences. Like every minute that we're awake, we're having experiences, but most of them are not educational. We do not learn from most of them. Some people learn from hardly any of them. I know you know people like that. Do you want me to answer your phone?
Oh, no.
I'm just kidding, I won't answer it.
No.
I didn't. Sorry, I didn't there yet.
Some people learn from hardly any of their experiences. I don't want those to be my students. I don't want my students to have all this target language thrown at them and never to have a minute to stop and really process it and think it through and figure out what part of it is important. Now, after you've had the experience and you've really made sense of it, it's really clear to you what was important from that experience, the next thing is you're ready for abstract conceptualization. Your students literally can't make sense of abstract grammar. They cannot, unless they've already seen what the grammar looks like in the real world. If you're showing them abstract concepts like, this thing always does this, but they've never seen language that does that, the abstract concept has nothing to map onto. We know that first we process meaning and then we process form. So if you want to teach students a lecture about core concepts like culture, grammar, or any other framework that's connected to the language, this is the time to do it, after they've had the experience and processed. Often this is presentation by a teacher, but it can also be by peers. Or it could be what Jose did today, which is a collaborative co-construction, what we call inductive grammar, where students say, oh, this is just the he, she, it present tense form of the verb, but without the subject pronoun in front. I figured it out. I see the pattern myself by looking at authentic examples of language. Students can co-construct rules for a lot of grammar, and when they can't do that, or when I want to make sure they're doing it well, I can step in and I can lecture and I can tell them what the rules are and give them examples. Also, students can do research. If what you want them to co-construct is culture, this might be an opportunity for them to look into other resources and report back to the class later. Finally, the last step is active experimentation. and that is where students take that original experience and make it their own. You have put the language in their head that they need. You've given them the input. Trying to ask students to create language when you haven't first put the language in their head is like asking them to pour from an empty pitcher, right? In order to get students to pour out, first you have to put in. So in step 1, we put the language in their head. In step 2, we help them make sense of the language and process the language. In step 3, we gave them the tools they need to organize it and make it really make sense. And now in step 4, they're ready to start using it. Oftentimes, I'll tell you that because these are, what we've given them is just the building blocks of language, it's going to take them many, many tries. And there's going to be a lot of errors along the way as they're trying to use this language, and that's a normal part of the process. And you should expect that and think errors are wonderful because they mean my students are trying to say things they haven't said before, and they're figuring it out as they go. That's a really good thing.